Anti-Semites target one of the commandments in this week's Torah portion. So the Torah talks about a person who comes in contact with a dead body. They become ritually unclean. That means that they can't enter into the temple. I'm not talking about modern day temples, the holy temple in Jerusalem. Anyone who comes in contact with a dead body is ritually unclean, and they have to go through a purification process. What does this involve? So the Torah over here says, you take a red cow, completely red cow, without a blemish, upon which a yoke has not come. It was never used for work. And it says over here that Moses told Aaron, his brother, give it to your son Elazar, who was a Kohen, a priest. He shall take it to the outside of the camp, and someone shall slaughter it in his presence. And then he shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle some of its blood toward the tent of meeting 7 times. Then someone else shall burn the cow before his eyes, the dead cow, its hide and its flesh and its blood, with everything, with its dung even. Then the Kohen takes cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson thread, and he shall throw them into the burning of the cow. Then the Kohen, the priest, shall immerse his clothing and immerse himself in water, and afterwards he may enter the camp. And then, I'm going to skip a little over here, someone who is ritually clean gathers the ash of the cow and place it outside the camp in a pure place. Now, whoever touches the corpse and becomes contaminated for 7 days, how does it become purified? On the 3rd day after becoming impure, and on the 7th day, they would have to sprinkle the water that had the ashes and all the other things mixed in it on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And then the person becomes purified. Let me just mute them. Yes.
Rabbi, when my husband Sam passed away, I sat with him, and I didn't want to leave him. His daughter Robert said, well, you can go home. I said, no, I want to wait till somebody comes for him.
You did the right thing.
Yes. So instinctively I had to.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with being in close proximity to a dead body. But if you wanted to enter into the temple, in the days when we had the temple, you couldn't until you went through this purification process. Likewise, a Kohen who would be given parts of different sacrifices to eat could not partake of them unless he went through the purification process. So where do the anti-Semites come into this issue over here? So Rashi quotes the anti-Semites who attack the Jewish people, criticize them, says, what's the logic over here? It doesn't make any sense. Take a red cow, you slaughter it, you burn it, and you then mix the ashes with water, and you take a hyssop and cedar wood and a crimson thread, and you sprinkle it on a person after 3 days, after 7 days. It's so illogical, it has no rational basis. So the Torah says, you're right, it doesn't have a rational basis. It's a kind of commandment called a chok. Chok is a commandment that does not subscribe to rationality. But we do it because God told us to do it. You see, in Judaism, there are actually 3 kinds of commandments. One kind of commandment is called mishpatim, plural, they translate it as judgments. Those are commandments that are totally rational. commandments against murder, against theft, against embezzlement, against fraud, commandments to give charity. These are things that make a lot of sense, and if the Torah had not been given, we would have thought of them ourselves, perhaps, because they're totally rational. That's one category. There's another category called Edot, which means testimonies. Commandments that are there to remember historical events. Like we have the Sabbath is to remember the creation of the world, that God created the world and he rested on the seventh day. Passover commemorates the Exodus from Egypt. Now, you wouldn't have thought of these commandments on our own, perhaps. It wouldn't have occurred to us to eat matzah every Passover, but once the Torah commands it, it makes sense. We understand what the rationality behind it is. There's something to be said about remembering historical events and trying to relive them and recapture the spirit of those events. So those are in between rational and non-rational. But then you have the third category, commandments that are totally not rational. In other words, even after you're told what the commandment is, not only would you not have thought of it yourself, but after it was presented to us, we still say, 1 second, why? What's the logic over here? It doesn't make any sense. And that's the point. It's not supposed to make sense. The idea behind it is that when we worship God, when we serve God, we have to serve God not because it makes sense to us, although certain commandments do make sense, not because it resonates within us, but because there's a higher authority. There's a concept of respect for higher authority in Judaism, and the truth is in other religions, you have the same idea, that religion is not just about doing things that make sense and are inspirational. We do things because we have a respect for a higher authority. And if you don't have respect for a higher authority, the end result will be that you won't do the rational ones either. Because if a person doesn't have respect for authority, what would stop him or her from stealing, from committing murder? And I always love to tell the story of my father. My father was walking home from the synagogue Friday night. My father was a very prestigious rabbi, and he's walking home. He's a senior citizen at that point. He's walking home from services, and he's accosted by a young man who probably was around 12 or 13 years old with a gun pointed at my father, demanding his money. Now, my father would not be carrying money on Shabbos. He wouldn't be carrying anything, but certainly not money. Now, my father was not going to go into a discussion about the intricacies of Jewish law with this kid who was ready to shoot and to kill in order to get money. So my father was a brilliant man and also very he was able to intuit to do the right things. So he looks at the kid and he says, "You're a good kid." And the kid says, "No, Oz bad." You know what? That was a positive thing that he answered that, because he recognized there's good and bad. Because some young people are amoral. They don't even recognize there's anything as something that's wrong or immoral. The kid was immoral, not amoral. Then my father says to him, "Do you have a minister?" And the kid says, "Yes." He says, "What do you think your minister would think if he knew what you're doing right now?" And the kid bowed his head in shame and walked away and was prevented from committing a heinous crime. So, I think it was brilliant. My father never prepared for this. This came on the spot. He thought of the saying the right things. But it was a brilliant exercise, because first he appealed to the child's sense of value, that the kid did have some good in him. By saying you're a good kid, that actually activated whatever spark of decency, of humanity he had. That spark was a little bit ignited. But then when he appealed to his respect for authority, the kid still had respect for authority. That prevented him from committing the crime. So if a person says, you know what, I'm only going to keep the commandments that make sense to me, but the ones that God tells me to do that don't make sense, I won't do, that you're telling God, I don't respect your authority. And therefore, when I feel I need to steal because I want the money, I'm not going to listen to you. I'll do whatever I have to do. No one stops committing a crime that they're bent on committing strictly out of logic. Logic doesn't work in education. Respect for authority is the foundation. So we have these three categories of commandments, and if we think a little bit more deeply into them, there are three different areas of ethics. There is ethics that's based on an authority who imposes those ethics on us, commands us to do those things. There's ethics that comes from within oneself, one's own conscience, one's own feelings. And there's ethics that's based on social responsibility. We'll start with the last one. Some people will develop an ethical system based on the fact that if I'm not going to be ethical, if I'm going to be dishonest, then and the other person could just do the same, be just as dishonest as me. And if we're all dishonest, that'll be the end of society. There'll be mutual destruction. Someone who goes into a department store and wants to shoplift and says, you know what, no one's the multi-billion dollar owners of this department store they're not going to become poor if I steal something worth $20. But if everyone thought that way, that would be the end of that business. And there would be no businesses, there would be no stores. So as one philosopher said, what's wrong for if everyone did it, it's wrong even if you did it and you're the only one. But you know what? That breaks down. That's not a guaranteed system. Why? Because when a person is bent on committing a crime because out of temptation, they don't think about the impact on society. In a classroom, it makes sense. It resonates in a classroom, but it doesn't resonate in real life. You can't get a generation of young people to desist from crime, from doing immoral things, based on the sense of social responsibility. Once you have respect for authority, then that enhances it, that reinforces it. The same thing is true. Some people tell you, I reach inside of myself and I develop a sense of respect and a sense of decency, a sense of morality from within myself. Sometimes people could do that, but there's no guarantee that your inner self is going to be moral. If people rely on their own conscience and their own feelings, it's no guarantee that they're going to remain moral. You have to start with a foundation of respect. And once you have respect, and then you develop an inner sense of identity with that idea that resonates within you, and then you have a sense of social responsibility, then your commitment becomes much more powerful. There's an expression, a biblical expression, that a threefold rope doesn't come apart. If you take one rope, but if you intertwine it with two other ropes, it becomes very solid. You have these three foundations. Now, if you think about it, these three foundations parallel the three different kinds of commandments. The commandments, the social commandments, don't kill, don't steal, those are based on social responsibility, developing a sense that I am responsible for the world. I can't do anything that will undermine the stability of the world. The Edot, the testimonial commandments, are there to inspire us that we should have a spiritual feeling from within us. So that makes the commandments that we do resonate within us. And the Chukim, the ones that are not rational, they are guided to develop a sense of respect for authority. And when you have all three of these commandments, you develop into a completely moral and holy person. There's a story in the Talmud. In the temple, I think I told the story a few months ago, but I told it in another context, and I'll tell it in this context of this week's Torah portion. In the temple, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, wore a special garment called the choshen, the breastplate. It was a square plate that had 12 jewels in them, 12 different jewels, and each jewel represented one of the 12 tribes. And he would wear this all day long. It's called the breastplate of judgment. And one day, one of the 12 jewels, the jasper, they say, which corresponded to the tribe of Benjamin, disappeared. How it can disappear? The Kohen Gadol was usually an older person. He wasn't running around and engaged in playing football where something could fall out. He was sitting in the temple all day long, studying and doing the service there. But it disappeared, and they had to find a replacement. And they discovered that in the city of Ashkelon, which is near Gaza, in southern Israel, there was a Roman official whose name was Dama ben Netina, Dama the son of Netina, and that he had that jasper that they needed. So they traveled to Ashkelon, and the financial situation of the temple was very good, and they offered him an exorbitant amount, 100,000 silver, whatever, shekels, whatever. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't sell it to you right now. It's a gesund. It's a gesund, as we say in Yiddish, or Gesundheit in German. He says, I can't sell it to you now. Why not? Because the jewel's in a box, it's locked, and the key is under my father's pillow, and he's taking a nap now. And I can't awaken my father. So they thought he probably wants more money, so they doubled the amount. And he said, I'm sorry, it's not the money. I can't awaken my father. So they tripled the amount and quadrupled the amount, and then they were convinced that he doesn't want to sell it. But he did want to sell it, but he didn't want to do it at the expense of his father's nap. His father did wake up, so he ran to get the jewel, and he pursued the rabbis, and he caught up with them, and he said, here's the jasper. So they offered to give him the amount, the quadrupled amount, because that's the amount they promised. He says, no, I don't want the quadrupled. I want only the original amount, because I'm not going to benefit and prosper and profit off the respect for my father. I didn't sell it to you not because I wanted more money. I didn't sell it to you because I didn't want to disrupt my father's sleep. So the Talmud says we're supposed to learn a lesson from this heathen Roman, and the Romans were not in good terms with the Jews. And the last people we would want to learn lessons from, you'd think, would be the Romans. But the Talmud says, no, you learn a lesson even from the Romans, even from our enemies. The respect that he had for his father should teach us a very important lesson, how we should respect our own parents. That's not the end of the story. The main point of the story is the end of it. What happened that year, a red cow was born on his farm. A red cow. It's very rare that a cow should be entirely red. And because it's so rare, in all of Jewish history, there were only 9 such cows that they used for this ritual. And the amount of money that he was able to get for it made up for the loss that he suffered by not asking for the full amount because of the respect he wanted to give his father. So God rewarded him that he got his money in the end through the red cow. So the commentators asked the question, God has many ways of making you rich. You can win the lottery. You can prosper in business. Why did God choose to reward him with a red cow? Do you have an answer?
Well, the red cow, we use the red cow to purify yourself when you're exposed to somebody who died,
right?
A dead body. So the red cow was even more valuable than.
Right, it was more valuable, but the question that is asked, why specifically did God reward him through the red cow? There's so many other ways God could have rewarded him for his mitzvah. And the answer they give is that God wanted to show the Jewish people that they have something in a way that is superior to what that Roman did. the Roman went to extremes to honor his father. That would reflect negatively on the Jewish people. That, look, you have to learn lessons from the Romans? You mean the Jewish people who are steeped in morality and steeped in Torah have to learn a lesson from a heathen, from probably an anti-Semite Roman? We don't know too much about him except that he was an official that respected his parents. That's all we know about him. So God says, you know what, I'm going to show the world that the Jewish people, in a way, have something superior to this heathen. Because honoring a parent is a mitzvah that makes sense. It's not a chok, it's not a super rational, a non-rational mitzvah. It's a very rational one. Your parents give you life, even if they do nothing more than just bring you into this world. And then after that, they nurture you and they do so much for you. It makes sense that you would want to show them the honor and respect, to reciprocate what they did for you. So as much credit as we're giving this heathen, and we're telling him that he did a great mitzvah and we should learn lessons, the fact that the Jewish people were willing to pay so much more for the red cow demonstrates that they're in a higher level, that they're willing even to do something, to give money for something that doesn't even make sense, something that doesn't carry the same rational weight as the mitzvah to honor parents. Another example would be a contemporary example. We don't have the red cow now that we have to buy, but a contemporary example would be on the holiday of Sukkot. There's a commandment in the Torah to take 4 species: a lulav, a palm branch, an etrog, a lemon-like fruit, but it's not a lemon. It grows mostly in the Mediterranean area, Israel, Italy. Hadassim, myrtles, and aravos, willows. Willows are ubiquitous. They don't cost very much. Myrtles are not as common. Lulav, that's also not so hard to find. But the etrog is much less available. And the laws concerning the etrog is that they have to be whole. They can't have blemishes on them. The shape has to be right. And a person could spend hundreds of dollars to get a beautiful etrog. And some people, a cheap one you can get for $20, $30. But a really good one, you can spend hundreds of dollars. After the holiday is over, how much is that etrog worth? Zero. Zero. It has zero value. In other words, you're only buying it to do a mitzvah. It has nothing to do with any benefit that you can get from it. And yet people are willing to spend hundreds of dollars for something that will bring them just an opportunity to do a mitzvah and have no value after. In the olden days, they used to say you could use the etrog to make jam out of it. But then I was told, no, don't try to do that, because at least in the Italian ones, because those are the best, they spray them heavily with insecticides, because they otherwise it would ruin the crop, and it's not healthy. So it's not even good for making jam out of it. But we're willing to spend huge amounts, and there are poor people who would give away whatever they had just to be able to do a mitzvah. There's a story that's attached to this. It's more appropriate for the holiday of Sukkot, but I'll tell the story anyhow. No one ever complains when I tell stories. There was this poor Jew. His name was David. It's a true story. This goes back about 250 years. His name was David, very poor, but he had an heirloom, a pair of tefillin. Tefillin are what men wear. And this was an heirloom because it belonged to some very great rabbi, I think, and it was very precious. And his wife always said to him, why don't you sell it? People are willing to give you a lot of money, and we'll have what to live on. We'll be able to live comfortably, because he was very poor. And he says, how can I sell such a valuable thing? It's an heirloom. It is so precious to me. It's a holy object. I can't sell it. Meanwhile, the holiday of Sukkot is arriving, and he sees they're selling the etrog. And he says to himself, you know what? I can't afford an etrog. I use the communal one. and I see rich people spending huge amounts of money to buy a beautiful Etrog. Why should I be any different from the rich people? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sell the tefillin, the heirloom, and buy the most expensive Etrog. And he does that, and he comes home with it, and he shows it to his wife, who says, "Where'd you get that from?" He says, "I sold the tefillin." She says, "What?" And she took the Etrog and smashed it on the floor. And he didn't get angry. And the Baal Shem Tov says that was one of the greatest sacrifices, that he didn't get angry. But the point of the story was that he was willing to give away his most precious thing just to do a mitzvah more beautifully. That's the power of the Jewish people, that they're willing to go to such extremes to do a mitzvah, even if the mitzvah doesn't make sense to them, even if it doesn't give them anything, except the knowledge that they did something that God wants them to do. Okay, we'll go off to another subject. This is a subject that the commentators are all discuss this, and they're trying to figure out what happened here. Moses had a brother Aaron and a sister Miriam. When the Jews were in the desert, there were 3 miracles that happened in their merit. The manna from heaven descended in the merit of Moses. The clouds of glory that protected them and did a lot of other things were there in honor of Aaron, his brother. The water that came from a rock in the desert, miraculously, was in the merit of Miriam. When Miriam passed away, the water ceased. And when the water ceases, and you have probably around 2 million people with cattle, and you don't have what to drink, people got upset, and they complained to Moses, which is what Jews do. They complain. That's throughout the Torah. We're always complaining. Sometimes it was for good things, sometimes it wasn't so good. So God says to Moses, "Take your staff, and I want you to speak to the rock, and it'll produce water." And he speaks, and nothing happens. So he takes his staff, and he strikes the stone, and the water gushes. And God rebukes him. And he says, "Because you didn't sanctify my name, you will not enter the promised land. You and Aaron, your brother, who was with Moses, will not enter the promised land." What did he do wrong? He performed a great miracle. If you try taking a stick and hitting a rock and see how much water comes out of it. It was a miracle. So there are at least 10 explanations. But the 2 most famous explanations are one of Rashi, the greatest Bible commentator, and Rambam, Maimonides. Rashi says that he was punished because God told him to speak to the rock, and he struck the rock. That's how Rashi explains it. Why did he strike the rock? Because this event occurred near the end of the 40 years. In the beginning of the 40 years, the same problem arose. There was no water, and God tells him to take his staff and hit the rock, and the water came out. So Moses probably thought, God told me to speak to the rock, but if it didn't work, he probably wants me to use the staff. He told me to take the staff with me, probably wants me to hit it. But that was a big mistake for Moses, because God wanted to demonstrate a greater miracle, that even by talking to the rock, it'll produce water. But it's still hard to understand why Moses, the greatest human being that ever lived, the person closest to God of any mortal, would be punished so severely, because Moses wanted more than anything else to cross the Jordan into the land. He prayed incessantly to God, "Please let me in." And God says, "No, you're not going." For what? Because he struck a rock and performed a smaller miracle? It's very, very painful when you read about Moses. It's hard not to identify with him, because he had such devotion to the Jewish people. Maimonides has a different take on it. Moses gets angry. That was his sin, that he got angry. He shouldn't have gotten angry at the people. If you think about more deeply, it's much deeper than what it sounds like, and both interpretations are really complementary. They really complement each other. Why did God tell Moses to strike the rock 40 years earlier, close to 40 years earlier, and then 40 years later he tells him to speak to the rock? Because the rock, although it means literally the rock, was a description of the nature of the people who just left Egypt. They were like, they had hearts like rocks. They had a slave mentality. When you enslave a people for hundreds of years, the people become very hardened, and the way to produce refreshing water, which is a metaphor for getting their emotions to come out, to be able to be good people with character, people with morals, people with feelings, Moses had to use tough love. Sometimes the only way you can get a person to change is when you use tough love. It's the last resort, but you have to use it. And it's love, but it's tough. So when the Jews came out of Egypt, they needed to be taught things through the harsh way, by rebuking them harshly, by taking the staff, the stick, and hitting the rock so it can produce the water. That was Moses' generation. Now we're talking about 40 years later. It's a new generation. This new generation, they're different. They didn't need the stick to produce the water. They just needed someone to talk to them. And when Moses struck the rock, that demonstrated that Moses was not the leader for this new generation, that it had to be someone, a younger leader, Joshua, who could more identify with the new generation. So Moses didn't commit a sin. What Moses did demonstrated that he was actually the leader of the past generation, and he would remain with them in the desert. And the Midrash tells us that when Mashiach comes, the dead will come back to life. Moses will arise and take all his generation with him across the Jordan. But it's his generation. The new generation you have to speak to in different ways. And the same thing happened with Jews in America. When Jews came to America from Europe, some of the teachers were used to the old-fashioned way. Boom. You didn't listen to the teacher teaching the class, you got slapped on the wrist, if only that. They had a stick. They used very tough, very harsh, tough love. Nowadays, anyone has the least amount of competency in education knows you talk to the children with love. Even if they're tough, you can't use tough love. Maybe there's some very extreme cases, but those are the rare exception. You have to use positive reinforcement because we're a different generation. We're not the same generation. We're not the hardened generation of European Jews who had to fight for their very existence and survival every day. They were much tougher. We're a much more fragile generation, and we need to use the positive approach. So Moses was not really a sin that he committed and he was punished. He was using his tactics. That was the tactic that he had to use. That's why he had to strike the rock. That's why he got angry. Sometimes Maimonides writes, you should never get angry. Except if you're a teacher, you should feign anger. Sometimes you have to show the student that you're upset by what they're doing, so you act as if you're angry. So Moses he was feigning anger, but it was the wrong generation. They didn't need the anger, they needed some soft words. And therefore God says, you stay with your generation. Joshua, your disciple, he will be the leader of the new generation. It's a very powerful lesson for us as well, how we have to relate to others. Any questions?
Kashrut is a chok. Is that right?
Yes, some put it in the category of chok, the kosher laws. But even a chok, it's interesting, even the commandments that are not rational, the rabbis attempted to give rational explanations for them. And even the red cow, there's a rational explanation that is given. But that's after the fact. Once you know that it's beyond rationality, you can then try to find rationality to make it more appealing. What is the rationality? So Rashi quotes an earlier source, Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan was his name. 11th century. And he says as follows: the Jews worshipped a golden calf, and they messed up. They created a lot of impurity. What happens when a child messes up? Who cleans up the mess? Mommy. So they worshipped a golden calf. A calf is a young cow. So what are you supposed to do? You take a red cow, a mother cow, to clean up the mess. So the symbolism is that it's a mother cleaning up the mess of the child. So that's the symbolism. But it's essentially, it's not a commandment that anyone would have thought of, and it takes a lot of creativity to think of explanations for it. So it's essentially, it remains a chok.
How long can I?
Okay. Any questions on Zoom? Okay. You have another question?
I always have in my mind I have a rational explanation about the hope.
Okay.
I think, we like to sit together and break bread. And I think that God wants us to be together as Jews. And so because we should honor the hope to be.
It forces us to socialize together.
To be together.
Okay, very good point. In fact, my grandfather, of blessed memory, in one of his books, explains a very enigmatic statement in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that a shochet, the one who slaughters an animal to make it kosher, is a partner to Amalek, the arch enemy of the Jewish people. And it's a very enigmatic statement. The shochet is considered to be the most important Jewish functionary. The shochet has to be more conscientious than the rabbi. The rabbi could get away with certain things, but the shochet can't, because if he makes one little mistake, the cow isn't kosher. No one will know. So how could he be compared to Amalek? So the simple meaning is that if he does things improperly, he's just as bad as Amalek, the arch anti-Semite. But my grandfather gave a beautiful explanation. He says, what kept the Jewish people together? Two opposites: keeping kosher and anti-Semitism. So in a certain way, they're partners, one through good and one through evil. But that's your point. Is well taken. Keeping kosher keeps Jews together because they're forced to socialize together. They can't socialize with others. Very good.
Thank you so much.